not a rabbi, and it's on the list of rabbi, and it just doesn't happen. And as I said, I'm giving this class is about neurodiversity and halacha, and I'm an expert in gender. You all know me, so I don't have to be all phone, but there's a webcam, so so I don't know how. Here's my disclaimer before is not an expert in anything. I like looking stuff up, and I like thinking about new ideas in Torah or ideas that are new to me at least. So I put this together. I know this pretty well. I don't know anything else outside of that. So if you ask me background questions, I will probably be stumped. My second disclaimer is part of that is I don't know all of the proper language here. We're going to be talking about neurodiversity, different types of ways that people think and different types of minds. And I'm not going to get it all right. I'm going to say words that might be not the preferred terminology now, and I apologize for that.
No.
I think it's insensitive. The next part of that is some of the words for translation are definitely insensitive. The word imbecile comes up, which I don't think is currently the appropriate word for anything. But I didn't change it. A, because I'm lazy and didn't want to go through and change it all. B, because how much am I going to mess with Steinfeld? And C, I thought it was worth the historical perspective of seeing how these ideas are looked at, and even if we might not use that word normally when we're talking about it, it's still ingrained in the way we think about the topics, which is I think worth noting and being aware of. All right, so let's start.
So it used to be a technical term where there were differences in what we call at sea level between imbecile, an idiot, and a moron.
Right.
And so originally these were not pejorative terms. They would be more or less objectively define a person's psychological status. Then after, there was a lot of other things like welfare and public assistance.
Yeah, any word that's used for a person that's different is eventually going to become so you got to keep up with it. Anyways, we have the word imbecile in there. So let's start. Neurodiversity, again, not an expert, but the way we're going to talk about it this evening is including any very wide gamut of it's a somewhat new idea that people are thinking about a lot, and it includes all the non-normative, various diverse ways that people's minds can work. That could include things like, very often when people talk about, a lot of times they're talking about autism or ADHD. It can also include intellectual disabilities, include psychiatric disability. So it includes everything. And the question is, how is that addressed? And if that is addressed in halacha, does that come up? And the category that comes up the most obviously is the category of shleita. There are three types of people that are exempt from mitzvahs: the cheresh, shleita, and katan. The deaf person, a shleita, which we'll define in a moment, but has some sort of intellectual differences, and a katan, which is a child. And they are all exempt from mitzvahs, as we see in this first Mishnah Torah, in the source number 1. Besimcha is talking about who's chayav in korban chagiga. So everybody's included in simcha. Chutz mecheresh shleita v'katan, except for cheresh shleita v'katan, they're not part of everybody. They are the exception, and they are exempt. And v'aro v'tamei, the Rambam explains later in the halacha, included here why those people are excluded, but that's for different reasons. But cheresh shleita v'katan, those three people are exempt because they are not b'nei chiyuv. They don't have any obligation whatsoever. And therefore, since they cannot accept any responsibility, they are patur from all mitzvahs and Torahs. So now here's the question: is what is a shreita? And if you look at source number 2 in Chagiga, Tana Rabbanan Ezehu Shaita, they asked the question that I just asked. What is a shaita? Who is a shaita? So it gives some examples of how you can define a person as a shaita. Hayetzi yechida b'layla, somebody who goes out alone at night. V'halon b'beis hakvoros, as somebody who sleeps in cemeteries. I don't know if that was a thing that had some sort of social, cultural significance back then. I think it's, but based on other places I saw, I think it's just that because I've seen it worded in other places, somebody who sleeps in places that nobody else sleeps. So I think it's just that it's supposed to be strange. Somebody who tears his own clothing. Those things are the signs of a shaita. And Rav Huna says it has to be all of those things. It has to be somebody who's going out alone at night, I guess doesn't have a sense of danger, somebody who's sleeping in cemeteries, doing things that are odd and inexplicable to other people, somebody who's destroying his own clothing. It has to be all of those things. And then Rabbi Yochanan says even in one of those areas, which is interesting. So now we're defining the shaita a little bit. Either it's somebody who is non-normative, and irrational in every way, in multiple ways, or in one particular way. But whatever it is what I think is noteworthy and worth looking at is that all of these things are behavioral. It's not asking. A shaita is somebody who you don't have to do a test. It is Ezehu shaita. Somebody, if you ask them this question, they give this answer. It's just saying if you see them doing this, and it's things that you can notice from afar. It doesn't have to be things that you are studying and assessing the person in any type of intricate way or exhaustive, comprehensive way. It's things that to me, it feels like things that a community would notice. All of those things are the ways that like a community would describe a person. Oh, that guy sleeps in cemeteries, right? So it's not about the person's internal goings on, how they work, how their mind works inside, how they deal with things. It's about what they look like on the outside, which is interesting. And then a little later on, Chagiga adds another one. Ezehu shaita zeh hama'abed et kol ma'shenesin lo. A shaita is somebody who loses everything that is, or loser destroys everything that's given to him. So that's, would seem to speak to the inability to accept responsibility. Now, the way that it's dealt with, as we said before, is the shaita. If we think about accommodation, how is Torah accommodating the shaita? It's accommodating them by saying you don't have to do it, right? So it's maybe accommodation. I was speaking with a friend, and the friend argued that I said it's exclusion. He said it's accommodation. Eventually we agreed on it's non-inclusive accommodation. It's accommodating the mitzvah, saying you are not required to do this. That's okay. But it doesn't modify the activity, the mitzvah, in any way for that person to make it doable for them. We'll see a little bit how that's qualified in terms of how excluded they are exactly. And also kind of some differences in defining the shaita a little bit more by putting them into a frame of reference with other people. So in source number 4, we have a case where somebody is walking along on Friday afternoon, and traveling, and it gets dark. He's got his animal with him, and he's riding a horse or a donkey or whatever, and he's got his bag, and it's going to be Shabbos soon. So what does the Rambam say? If he's got a non-Jew with him, ask the non-Jew to carry your bag. If there is no non-Jew with him, then put the bag on the donkey while it's moving, and then later on the halacha that I don't have here, he goes into detail exactly how. There's technicalities about how to do that so that involve all the specifics of carrying on Shabbos, but I'm not going to get into that. What I'm going to get into is the next halacha, where he says, what if he's walking and he's got an animal and he's accompanied by a cheresh, shaita, and katan. By the way, I didn't explain before because we're focusing on shaita. Cheresh is a deaf person. Usually, it's anytime we speak about cheresh, like in this context, it's a deaf person that doesn't speak. I'm not going to get too much into a cheresh. I don't know all of the practicalities of how that halacha is applied now. I don't think that the cheresh, the way it existed then, exists now, because of mainly because of sign language. But again, not an expert. Look into it if you want. I'm not going to talk about cheresh very much. It's interesting because it's a physical disability that is, you'll see later on, is the way halacha looks at it is as a cognitive or intellectual difference. But I'm not going to get into that. Anyways, this person is traveling with a cheresh, shaita, and a katan and an animal. So what do? Do you put it on the animal? Where the Rambam already said there's all sorts of specific rules because you're leading the animal, and you have to like make sure to do it in right ways. Or do you just give it to the cheresh, shaita, and katan who aren't obligated in mitzvahs at all? It says you put it on the animal and not the cheresh, shaita, and katan. Why? Don't give it to any of those people because they're all Jews. Which is interesting. So we're excluding them from mitzvahs, saying that they're exempt, and including them in the value of not doing malachas on Shabbos, that for them it's still something that is important, and then you should value that as well and value their status as Jews and not ask them to do a malacha if you can avoid it. However, if you don't have an animal with you, now we get into some interesting little combinations. If there is a deaf person and a shaita with you, then then you give it to the shaita. You prefer asking the shaita to do malacha over the cheresh. We'll see why. Rashi will explain. Rashi on Rashi on the Gemara that Rambam gets it from. Shaita v'katan, if you have a shaita with you and a young person with you, neisin l'shaita, you give it to the shaita. Cheresh v'katan, if you have a cheresh and a katan, a deaf person and a minor with you, neisin le'ez mehen shiyut, so you give it to whichever one you want. There's no difference. There's no priority. Rashi says on the Gemara that this comes from l'shaita yehiv the leisle das klal. You give it to the shaita who does not have any das. Now this kind of informs how we're looking at the shaita and why they are exempt from halacha. We said before that a shaita is not a ben chiyuv. Now we're saying that the shaita doesn't have any das, and therefore is unable, I would suppose, unable to perform mitzvahs or unable to be expected to perform mitzvahs in a particular way. So Rashi says you give it to the shaita over the cheresh because he doesn't have any das, and then Rashi said because the cheresh has a little bit of das, just a weak das. Again, we're not going to get into exactly why that's pursued that way. Next page. Okay, so now talking about accommodation, we get into, there's not a lot of it, it's mostly just exemption, but there is something interesting. This Rashi here, source number 7, is explaining something that's not said explicitly in the Gemara that he's talking about, but Rashi infers it and explains it to us, that the Chachamim, that there's no kiddushin for a cheresh, shaita, and katan. Minor can't get married, a shaita can't get married, and a cheresh can't get married midiraisa, because none of these people can make a kinyan. They can't acquire things, and therefore they cannot acquire a bride. But the Chachamim were masakin kedushin specifically for a cheresh, but not for a shaita or for a katan. And the next two sources look into that a little bit, why that might have been the case, why there was differences. So first we look at why was a cheresh given this rabbinic ability to get married and not a shaita. And it says that a deaf person, both male and female, they were the Chachamim made a takana that they can have kedushin, the kaima takanta the rabbanon, because they're able to fulfill the takanas of the rabbanon. Rashi explains, if you look down in source number 10, what does that mean? It means they're able to do follow rules and do normal things. You can get along with them. In the case of marriage, where the entire activity is another end to be done. Therefore, tikinu lahu rabbanan nesuyin, the rabbanan made nesuyin for them. That they can get married. Shaita v'shaita. A shaita cannot get the law kayama takanta rabbanan that cannot fulfill the takanas of rabbanan, therefore can't follow rules, can't get along in an expected way. The ein adam dar in nachash b'kfifa achas, and uses this interesting expression. You don't live in a basket with a snake. So the way they're explaining this is that to be married to a shaita, whether the person that they're married to is not a shaita or the person they're married to is a shaita, either way, being married to a shaita would be like being in a basket with a snake. It would be unexpected. You wouldn't be able to live normally. And therefore the Chachamim did not make kedushin. So that's interesting that we now look at. It seems like this is just kind of a compassionate thing. Why are the Rabbanim misaking kedushin at all for somebody who's patur from it? And it doesn't say it explicitly. This is just my own gut feeling. And it seems like it's for compassion. This is a big part of life. And so they said, we're going to make this exist for them. They can have that part of life. Shaita, they said it's not going to work though, because they're not going to be able to do it. Okay, so again, still there's a little bit of accommodation for the cheresh, not so much for the shaita. Then the next source asks, well, what about a katan? That's interesting. Why didn't if a cheresh has rabbinic marriage, why doesn't a minor have the rabbinic marriage? I don't know why exactly we would want that. Marrying off 6-year-olds.
Bill Howard got married at 12, right?
Did he?
Yeah, he said he had a palace before he had film. He used to call him Mike because he had a palace.
Talis and that's fun. How did that work? Did they check him?
I think he was a guardian, but Kabbalah.
All right. Well, we're not going to get into technicalities. So he'll Parasha got married at 12. But there's and again, like I said, not an expert. I have no idea if any of this stuff is la halacha. I just found a Gemara that says it, so it might not be practically applicable at all. But at least here in this context, there is no marriage. There's no kedushin for a katan. Why? And this is interesting because it says a katan is eventually going to get to a point where they can get married. They're going to grow up and mature and be able to get married, but a cheresh will never get there. And that's interesting to me too. If we're talking about what the standards are and the criteria are for the Chachamim to make accommodation and halacha for people, that's an interesting one. If there's a way that they're eventually going to be included in this anyways, and you don't artificially create it for them. If they're never going to be able to have it, then you look into okay, cheresh and shaita, they're never going to be in a situation where they can get married. Let's look at if we can make that possible for them. And then the cheresh, they decided yes, they will. So that's the shaita. And there's not a lot of there's really not a lot of specifics as to what. There's a lot of things that could be. Like if somebody loses everything that they get. I mean, I could fit into that, right? By the way, I should have noted, I'm not an expert, and my only qualification in the neurodiversity department is that I might have ADHD, and I say might because I have not been officially diagnosed because I cannot get around to making the appointment.
Didn't Brother Chase give a share recently
I think he did.
on like neurodiversity?
I think he might have. Not in halacha, I don't think. I think it was probably Chassidus. That's his field of expertise. I didn't see it. So I didn't steal it from him. And it's not plagiarism.
Maybe you stole it from you.
No, he didn't steal it from me. All right. So what are we talking about? Neurodiversity could be a lot. Shreita could be a lot of things. It's this blanket thing that's behavioral, and there's not a lot of modification of the parameters of halacha for that person. But we do get a different category of person for whom halacha is modified a lot. And that term is isthmus. The isthmus is a sensitive person. You see in 11, the Jastrow definition. What does it say? Of feeble health, delicate, fastidious in diet. Isthmus, it comes from a Greek word. I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it's related to the word asthenia. Or if you know the word calisthenics, comes from the same root. And in that context, it means somebody specifically who's physically weak. The Rambam actually looks at isthmus as a physical thing as well, so somebody who's physically cold and therefore needs warmth. But most other Rishonim translate isthmus as somebody who is as a synonym for anina hadas, as someone who is sensitive das, sensitive perceptions, and is particularly particular about how things need to be for them. So the isthmus will look at the types of exceptions that are made for them. If you look at the Piskei Rosh in number 12, so he brings in the name of some unnamed goyin, that somebody who wants to wash their face on Yom Kippur. So you're not allowed to wash your face on Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to bathe and wash. But he says that an isthmus, somebody who is pained on a regular, somebody who just on a regular day, not just in Yom Kippur, then all of a sudden they want to wash their face, but on a regular day, they can't rest until they've done this part of their routine and wash their face. Then that person can wash on Yom Kippur, but not everybody else. All right. So that's already interesting, right? Everyone else is still prohibited. So that's interesting. What's happening here exactly? It doesn't seem that they're putter from the mitzvah of discomforting yourself in Yom Kippur. They still have to fast. They still have to do the other things. It's just that there's parameters for the type of discomfort you're supposed to experience on Yom Kippur. You're not supposed to inflict pain on yourself, right? And for this person, that would be painful. So it looks like we're starting to get into something where it's more about the person's internal experience, and we're changing the way that the halacha is applied to that person based on the way that that particular individual perceives and experiences things, which is interesting. The next is Mishnah in Brachos, number 13. Says Raman Gamliel bathed or washed. Raman Gamliel bathed on the first night after his wife passed away. Students, taking everything as a teaching, said, does that mean that an avel, a mourner, is allowed to bathe? And he said, no, just me, because I'm an isthmus, right? I am different. I need to bathe every day, and therefore I'm allowed. So again, an exception. Next, sukkah. So Abaye was sitting with Rav Yosef. Now Rav Yosef is interesting. He's going to come up a lot. Well, what time is it, by the way? Are we hitting the what time do we have till?
25.
Okay.
By the way, that's like the 9 days these days people shower even though you're really not supposed to. I guess we're all this, and
that's the thing that's commonly said, is that everyone's an isthmus now, which is interesting because I hear often everyone has ADHD now, right? So there's an interesting idea of maybe everyone's neurodiverse now. I think isthmus, if it's not clear, I'm presenting isthmus as a type of neurodivergence. I don't know exactly what label it would correlate with. Maybe none. Maybe OCD. Maybe autistic spectrum. I'm not sure. A lot of things, or maybe nothing. The question I always like to ask people is, why is a bat not kosher? Anyone know why? Is it because it doesn't have hooves and chew its cud?
Technically, a bird.
It's technically a bird. It's listed among all of the birds that are not kosher. So a bat is a non-kosher bird. So like maybe we can't translate isthmus as an exact corollary to a term that we have now, but it seems to overlap with a few things. You ruined my giveaway later. That's why you never invite a smart person to this year. But yes, so Rav Yosef was also blind. What?
Rabbi Victor Miller translate instant as a finicky person.
Okay,
That's what I'm just.
right. Yeah, a finicky person. So there's different translations in different places, different ways of looking at it. I think the best way to get an idea of what it is just by these stories that we're going to see here, where Rav Yosef is one of the big ones. It says, explains, oh no, I'm like this, right? Actually, Rav Yosef never calls himself an istinus. Rav Yosef calls himself an unindas, and but the Rishonim all equate the two. So let's continue. What were we saying? Oh yeah, there's the sukkah, right? So basically, I have a Yosef commented on Yosef, and the wind was blowing and was blowing things into the, blowing things into the soup, basically, right? And Rav Yosef said to him, get my food out of here. I'm leaving the sukkah. Abaye said, you're not pater from the sukkah. Just things falling into your soup doesn't make you pater from eating in a sukkah. It has to be that this food is getting ruined. And Rav Yosef said to him, and I'm looking at the Lilididi, for me, kivan da'anina da'ati, since I am of sensitive das, it is as if when something falls into my soup, as if it's completely ruined. So that's, again, looking at personal experience, how it's different. And I believe that's, I don't know exactly what the halacha is, but certainly Rav Yosef was applying the halacha differently for himself because he perceived things differently. I know. Actually, that one I saw in Shulchan Aruch and Magen Avraham. It actually comes down that way. There's exceptions for people who experience things differently. Another Rav Yosef story. Rav Yosef had some date trees, and there was bloodletters who would come and do their bloodletting underneath the date trees, and then crows would come and peck at the blood, and then they would fly up and peck at the dates. And Rav Yosef didn't like it. He said, "Get out of here! You're ruining my dates." And again, Abaye, apparently, Abaye was the one who confronted Rav Yosef on these things. What? He was a student. Okay. So he's trying to figure out what halacha was being taught from this, right? So Abaye asks, but hang on a second, they have a chazaka. They come here every single day and they do this job. And we know that there's a halakha. Once a person is established that they can work in a certain place, then you can't kick them out. And he says, no, but there's somebody else taught once they start damaging, then all bets are off. You can ask them to leave. Abaye challenges it again. He says, no, but that exception, that halakha was said specifically with regard to a certain type of damage, with regard to a basic kisei, and I forget what's the other one. So, smoke in bathrooms. If a person's damaging your property near you with neighbors using property nearby with smoke and foul odors from a bathroom, then you can, even if they have a chazaka, you can make them leave because they're causing damage to your property. And Rav Yosef said, for me, I experience crows, blood-eating crows pecking at my dates like a basic kisei and like smoke. So again, Rav Yosef's interesting, unique experience is given a modification in halacha. Seems to be accommodated in very specific ways. All right, so now we're going off a little bit on the Rav Yosef tangent and addressing what Dober spoiled earlier, but not yet. First, we're going to see something else. Tana Rabbanan. Three types of people, their lives are not life at all. They're not true life. And they are the Rachmanin, people who are compassionate, are Afchanim, people who have a hot temper, and Anine Adas, people who are very fastidious or finicky or particular about the way physical things are. Rav Yosef said, that's me, I'm all three of those. So the Rashbam just explains what that means exactly, because like, what does it mean a compassionate person in their life isn't a life? He says, the Rashbam says, we're talking about people for whom the magnitude of this feeling is extreme and the frequency of it is constant. Somebody who feels this compassion, for instance, extremely strong and constantly feels it to the extent that they are not able to, they never get any rest. Amen. Menucha, the Rashbam says. So they're constantly bothered by this. So even a compassionate person, where we would think compassion is a good thing, if it's interfering with their life, it can be disruptive. And so Rav Yosef said, that's me. Now, the Ben Yehoyada says, it has an interesting explanation of this. As Dovid told us earlier, here's my big reveal, dump. Rav Yosef, now, in addition to being an isness and overly compassionate, excessively compassionate, and excessively hot-tempered, Rav Yosef was also blind. It's mentioned in other places. I'm not going to get into it here. I was going through, then the source sheet got too long. It would have been a fifth page, and so I couldn't do it. But so Ben Yehoyada connects the two and says that a person, what is this teaching us? The Gemara is teaching us that what? Yeah, the Ben Ish Chai. So I'm saying specifically the name of the Sefer because last time I said the Ben Ish Chai said, and somebody corrected me. He says Ben Yehoyada. So yes, the Ben Ish Chai explains that what he thinks the Gemara is trying to teach us that that a blind person is particularly likely to have these other three types of differences, and he explains why. Yes. So basically what he explains is if a person can see, a